Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are now approaching our last panel of our two-day digital disruption conference, and it's been a very eventful last 48 hours with some great thought leadership and insights shared by all of our speakers and panelists. And the next one absolutely won't let you down either. Next up, I would like to introduce Scott Wall, CIO of Bank of Victoria, who will be our moderator for today's panel title AI Dream, Understanding Ethical AI and the capabilities which can be afforded by intelligent automation to any business. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Scott, and your very capable panel of experts.
Thanks, Deb, and hi, everyone. As Deb said, I'm the CIO for Bank Vic. Bank Vic is a Victorian-based mutual bank, and what that means is that we're actually owned by our customers. We offer a full retail banking service to police, emergency services, and the health industry. So we're a very focused bank, but we have all the same challenges and all the same requirements from our customers, or our members in our case. So we're very much focused on what can AI do for us, what can AI do for our members, what new products and services can we create. So before we get into the meat of the panel, I'd like to hand over to my panelists to let them introduce themselves. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thanks, Scott. I'm Sandeep Reddy. I'm an associate professor and AI and healthcare researcher at the Deakin School of Medicine.
And Augustus, how can you introduce yourself now?
Sure. Yeah, my name is a bit hard to pronounce, so just call me Gus. And I'm the head of AI/ML at carsales.com. And yeah, I lead a team which is responsible in building various AI technology, productionizing them, and integrating them into various products within the business.
Okay, so we've got a pretty wide range of experts, or one of the experts, although I suspect if you're at university, you probably qualify as an expert. So from my perspective, I'm a traditional CIO, so I have to worry about technology across the whole bank, from the desktop and networks right through to databases, the data center. But I see that AI and what AI can do for banking is huge. And one of the things is it's like any new technology. At first, it's all exciting and underperforms, and then eventually it just becomes the wallpaper, and it's expected. If I look at what in financial services, what we're doing with AI, there's a whole bunch of things that people now take for granted. So I don't believe AI is a dream. I think it's something that's just starting, and it's going to be an interesting journey. And if I think about biometric security, you look at your phone, it recognizes you before it allows you into your banking app. You can use your voice to authorize payments, and it knows your voice from anybody else's. We use AI to detect fraud on our credit cards and payment systems. We use AI to detect spam and phishing emails. We use it to assist in credit assessment and credit decisioning for when we make loans. And we use a lot of AI in cybersecurity, mainly around detecting anomalies in network traffic, or looking at analysis on logs using machine learning algorithms to detect malicious behaviors that a human being couldn't really detect. Where do I see the next generation going? I think the next generation is, as per the topic that we're talking about, it's intelligent automation. It's a symbiosis or augmentation of our staff and our customers to allow us to achieve more together. So we traditionally think of chatbots as one of the faces of AI to the general public, but I think a digital assistant is probably a better way of describing what these will become. And these will be used not only by our customers in performing their banking tasks, but also by our staff to assist. And where I see that happening is there'll be a handoff, and it'll be a two-way handoff. So in some cases, a customer will start with a chatbot or a digital assistant, and the digital assistant will handle the tasks that it can handle, and it understands the context. And then it'll hand off to human beings for the more complex or unusual requests. And equally, human beings will hand off some tasks, even potentially halfway through a conversation with a customer, to complete. So once you've understood the requirements and you've solved the more complex problems, then you can hand off the the closing out of the call, the sending through of additional documentation, or making a payment or sending an email to an automated assistant. And I think really where we want to be is we want to be eventually in the position where we can predict why a customer is interacting with us. So the contact center agent, for instance, a call comes in and AI-based machine learning algorithms can predict why that person is contacting us. And it could be that they've got an upcoming payment and they don't have enough money in their account to cover it, or they've gone overdrawn, or there's suspicious credit card activity. We should be able to predict that from modeling based on the data we collect and using AI and machine learning to surface those potential conversations immediately. So the customer rings in, and the first thing we do is say, are you ringing up about XYZ? So I think AI is not a dream, and it's certainly starting to deliver, and I think it will continue to deliver in financial services. I was wondering what the view is from sort of the non-financial services team. So Gus, can you tell us what's happening in your environment and organization, and whether you believe that AI is delivering or will deliver?
We also experience the same, Scott. So AI is definitely not a dream. Yeah, it's real. And at Castles, we actually use a lot of AI technology to solve various business problems. And an example, like we have an AI which actually automatically categorizing the car photos, which is taken by photographers, yeah, at many dealerships. So this was actually costing a business like a $250,000 a year, just manually select drop down of what category the photo belongs to by human, right? So it's all automated now, yeah. And another example is actually we also using AI to automatically approve a private advertisement, yeah. So when you're selling your car through our portal, yeah. So now AI will have a look at it and it will approve it if nothing fishy in your classifieds, yeah. And otherwise, it will go to human to verify further, yeah. So that's another way of actually improving the operation efficiency, and at the same time improving the customer experience, because prior to this automation, right, it takes about 2.5 hours for an ads to be approved manually by a human, yeah. So now it drops to only 7 seconds, yeah. So from the moment you press the submit your payment for your ads, 7 seconds later the ads is out there, yeah. So dramatically improve the customer experience as well, yeah. And also another example, despite the popular belief that people think that AI actually invading our privacy, right, we actually use it to go the opposite, right? So we use our AI technology to actually look for a ratio number in the photo of car that you posted on our portal for selling, yeah? And we detect where it is and we blur them to protect your privacy, yeah. And the reason for this is because there are some criminals, we call it ratio cloner, come to actually an online retail site like ours, right, which crop the ratio photo of your car, right, and then print it, stick it into their car, and commit all kinds of criminal activities, yeah, at the expense of yourself, right? So yeah, so we use it to protect the customer, yeah. And this is what the AI technology capable of delivering today, yeah. And just exactly like what you said, Scott, I also agree that there will be a hands-off between AI and human in terms of like chatbot, yeah, in the near future. However, I'm also expecting if move fast forward maybe another 10 years towards the future, I'm actually hoping the AI one day can actually do everything that we can do in terms of like handling the customer inquiry, engaging with conversation with the customer without actually being assisted. Yeah, but yeah, that's still maybe 15 to 20 years from today. Yeah.
Okay, and you know, I think that's a fantastic idea. Being able to auto categorize car pictures, and I think the operational impact of AI is huge. When everybody's being driven now by productivity and efficiency requirements, that sort of menial task, which people don't really want to do, and even the customer doesn't want to do, it's a big win for all parties. So, Sandy, you're a professor, university, looking at healthcare. And I think healthcare impacts all of us, and we all want healthcare to improve. And we've all heard interesting things about what AI can do. Can you tell us a little bit about where you see healthcare benefiting from AI today and where potentially that goes in the future?
Certainly, there's a lot of similarity in terms of AI, what it can do in other sectors and in healthcare. But we've got to bear in mind, healthcare sector is very nuanced and it's very, very specialized and complex. Traditionally, healthcare services and health systems have been slow in adopting technology, They've largely been followers as opposed to leaders. And you can imagine why. That's primarily because we are talking about patient lives and those kind of risks that emerge in terms of treatment and management. So they're pretty cautious in terms of adopting new technology. But having said that, we've already seen quite a few studies and case studies and applications where AI can really make a huge amount of difference. And why do I personally feel like there's a lot of promise in AI is because I also consider the current healthcare issues that we face. Currently, there's exponentially increasing costs in delivering healthcare, and there is no solution to that. We also see there is difficulty in accessing healthcare, both geographical barriers and financial barriers. In addition to that, it takes a long period of time to train clinicians. So because of that, that leads to a mismatch between demand and supply. With all these issues kind of increasing every year, there's more issues than this. There isn't really a lot of solutions that are available for us. In that regard, I personally believe that AI does present it's one of the solutions. And why so? When you look at the ability of AI, in particular machine learning, its ability in terms of pattern recognition and predictive analysis, it's very useful in analyzing complex and high dimensional data. In healthcare, as you very well kind of imagine, every year, whether it's the hospitals or in the primary care sector, we have increasing amount of data being collated. It's humanly impossible for medical doctors or other kind of clinicians to be able to kind of one is to be able to analyze all the data, but also keep themselves upfront with the kind of new and emerging technology or medical guidelines that are coming through. In that regard, machine learning plays a huge role. Within machine learning, to be more specific, we have seen ability of convolutional neural networks to be able to analyze image data, medical imaging data, being able to both present diagnosis, but also prediction. We also see in the ability of natural language processing in screening or triaging patients, but also in able to transcribe real-time conversations between doctors and patients. We also seen the ability of natural language processing applications to process biomedical data in terms of being able to analyze huge amount of literature and give summary recommendations. So while the promise is there, one of the things that we have noticed in healthcare is that there is a lot of in-house or in silico studies, but in terms of being able to get that into clinical workflow, integrate into healthcare, that isn't really happening. There are certain instances where medical imaging kind of AI applications have been integrated into CT machines and present real-time analysis. But in other areas like AI-enabled clinical decisions about systems or NLP applications, that adoption is still slow. And while having said that, I think with the kind of a focus on AI in healthcare, the support government is providing, the health services are looking at, it's likely within the next few years we'll start to see that integration and adoption of AI in healthcare.
Yeah, I think you're right. The whole concept of a general AI, where we have a single AI agent who can pretty much do everything, is a long way down the track. I think, as Gus alluded to, I think we're going to live in a world probably for quite some time where we run multiple AI-based agents, and each of those agents is very specific to a particular context or particular problem. And I think one of the biggest challenges will be, and I think this is where people have a key role to continue playing in those customer or patient interactions, is potentially choosing which AI agent is applicable, or moving from one AI agent to another AI agent to solve more complex problems. So, in the healthcare industry, I can only imagine that you hear horror stories about young doctors working 70, 80 hours a week. Sounds a little bit like finance. But obviously, if they make mistakes because they're tired or they're not up to speed with the latest medical information or diagnosis tools, or something changes, so what they learned at med school is no longer considered best practice, then the outcome is probably pretty horrendous for the patient. Whereas in banking, we can always recover from somebody losing money because of an AI experience going awry. I think, what do you see, Gus, in terms of the potential risks of or challenges of implementing AI? Where can it go wrong? And maybe give us some examples if you can think of some.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like the current AI tech is very, very narrow. Yeah, only it does really well. Sometimes actually beat the hell out of us. Yeah, but only on one particular task, like classifying the breed of dog, for example, right? Yeah, but then here's a very, very interesting example that I always like to use. Like at car sales, we build an AI tech called Cyclops. Yeah, apart from classifying the angle of the car in the photo, yeah, it knows what is the car make model down to the trim level. Yeah. So it's better than any of us because no one can remember 10,000 types of trim level of car, right, in Australia, right? Yeah. And the interesting thing is, if you give this AI, Cyclops, a car that it never seen before, it never been trained with it before, right? But that car has a clear logo at the back of the car, right? It's saying the name of the car, right? It won't actually make an inference that, oh, this is actually the model of the car, right? Yeah. While if you pass this to like a 10-year-old kids, they will know, oh, this is actually the name of the car, right? Even though I never seen it before, right? Because most manufacturers put that logo at the back of the car. So these are the common sense that the AI tech lacking at the moment. Yeah, just like you said, it's very narrow. It's not broad like us. We are very smart in many areas, but not very deep in those areas. Right? But all of this knowledge, even though not that deep, it helps us to actually achieve a task that actually a way better performs than the AI technology. Yeah? So this is something that limiting the AI technology at the moment. Yeah. So I wouldn't see it happening until the next 10 years, until the next breakthrough to solve this.
Yeah. So it's the common sense problem, isn't it? That people can apply common sense and very wide-ranging contextual knowledge, whereas AI agents tend to be extremely focused, and they're only as good as the data they're trained on. And I know there's some new deep learning techniques which allow them to train themselves, but they still need to go through a process to do that training when they're probably not able to make accurate decisions until they've had enough data flow through and potentially they've been given some categorization of what the outcomes that we're looking for are. So from a banking perspective, we collect an awful lot of data, and certainly e-commerce platforms and the medical business, vast amounts of data, and that's what we can use to train these algorithms. Sorry, my light's gone off. But the biggest challenge, I think, is getting that data and then getting that data to a level of data quality that we can actually use it to realistically train these AI agents, because as has been proven in some pretty high-profile cases, that bias can be introduced into algorithms. And again, as I said, bias in the banking sense could mean that somebody is refused a loan. Bias at car sales could be that you don't present them with the appropriate selection of cars that they might be interested in. But then, Sandeep, bias in data and AI in the medical profession could lead to misdiagnosis. How is the medical profession approaching that problem? Because that's a life or death type problem.
Absolutely. Just like other sectors, ethical and legal matters are increasingly becoming very prominent and being discussed actively in AI and healthcare. Ethics, obviously, as you may imagine, plays a very prominent role in routine medical care, with or without AI. It includes the principles of no harm to patient and protection of the privacy of patient. These principles also apply to the AI and applications in healthcare. We're seeing from overseas examples of where AI applications have discriminated against minority populations. And this discrimination can happen here in Australia. It can lead to exacerbation of existing health disparities. We are also seen where patient data has been used to train AI models without appropriate permissions being taken from the patients. And we also seen where data has been published in the open domain, which can lead to identification of patients. This all present major ethical problems. And then if you take into consideration the legal issues, that could be also a problem, which, as you alluded to, Scott, mishaps can occur when you have things going wrong or with AI in clinical environments. At this stage, it's not really clear from a medical legal perspective who becomes responsible. So that has to be still addressed. However, I'm personally confident these issues, with some attention and with the right input, that could be overcome. These issues are not insurmountable. We need to keep we need to pay attention to those issues, obviously. And if we pay attention, obviously, those problems, then we will need to carefully consider them and try to identify solutions. In fact, myself have outlined a governance framework that takes into consideration ethical, legal, and regulatory issues, and also presented potential solutions to mitigate this. This was published in a major Journal of American Medical Informatics. In the interest of time, I won't go into the detailed aspects of the governance framework, but if anybody is interested, they can just Google my name and Journal of American Medical Informatics. I'm sure you'll be able to find the article. So that particular governance framework, in brief, outlines fairness, transparency, and accountability as key components that can address the earlier mentioned issues.
Yeah, I think that you raise a good point there, Sandeep. Governance is so important, especially when we live in a world where the tools to use AI and to build AI are literally at everybody's fingertips. So, you know, a person within any industry can literally at home on their PC or laptop, they can create an AI agent. They can train it with data sets that they download from the internet or they source through their work. But then who actually decides and who monitors, who checks that the outcome is correct, that there's no bias, that those AI algorithms and models are regularly tested, that we then retrain them appropriately, and we need to get that governance in place, and we need to get operating models set up, very much in the way that we've done for data and data analytics. We've spent a lot of time looking at data quality, looking at data ownership. How do we test for good data quality, and then how do we actually use that data? How do we make sure that you know, we respect people's data privacy? I think that's a challenge for all of us, and I think the technology is getting ahead of the ethics, although you know, it's getting a lot more airtime, and certainly the government's come out with its 8 AI ethics principles, which you look at them and you think, okay, that they seem pretty straightforward. But it's how do I take those ethics, how do I wrap those up in governance and put those into commercial or hospital environments to make sure that these AI agents are even just identified, because you can run these on, you know, a mobile phone. In fact, quite a few do run on mobile phones. There's no way that you can say, I know where all my AI agents are these days, because you know, citizen developers, low code, no code developers can create these things, download open source algorithms. So I think that governance is really key, and I think ultimately, certainly from a banking perspective, and I would suspect from most commercial enterprises and government and environments like hospitals, ultimately that will sit, you know, accountability will stop with the board, which means that our boards need to become aware of what AI is being used for, what AI can do, and they need to be considering whether they want to go down that path in certain areas, and what they believe is acceptable for the customer or the patient, and then they need to be able to say, well, how are we monitoring, managing, testing? So I think that's a huge challenge, and as always, it's a massive overhead, both in terms of cost, people's time, education of people, and a lot of these aren't sort of considered as equal to what can I do with AI to make money, or to save time, or to speed up a process, or to come to a better outcome. And the problem is the better outcome, well, whose perspective is that from? Is that from the person trying to sell, the person trying to speed something up, or the person who's receiving the product or service? So Gus, is this something that car sales is looking at and thinking, you know, where can we go with AI and just how far and what are the controls?
Yes, definitely. We discussion like this come from time to time. Yeah, making sure that we are heading towards the right direction. Yeah, but at the moment, we are still in the what we call it honeymoon period. Actually, we're enjoying the benefit of AI. Yeah, so, but we starting to realize that the more successful AI tech that we deploy, the more complex AI that we want to build, and the more complex AI we want to build, having to pull all of this, yeah, with the bias. So we actually have an ethic framework as well at Castles, yeah. And we actually built it just a couple of months, 6 months ago, and there is actually a forum that we regularly discuss together around this as well. Yeah. So definitely, because we have customers' data, yeah. So we have to take this very, very seriously. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we influence decision making of a lot of people in buying a car. It's not like decision in buying medicine, right? But buying a car is also a big expense as well. Yeah. So it's important for us to actually follow this protocol.
Yeah. So that sounds brilliant. I mean, we've got the bank I work at, we've got an information management committee which looks at, amongst other things, the ethics of data use, and we're looking to extend that to cover AI. Albeit we tend to buy products which have embedded AI. So in some cases, we're not even really aware of the AI that we're using. And generally it's wrapped up in email server software, for instance, filtering out spam or looking for phishing. In cybersecurity software, looking for anomalies in network behavior or software behavior. So it's a bit of a challenge. And I'm sure in medical field, it's even more of a challenge. Do you see this concept of an ethics board or a subcommittee of a hospital's board, for instance, Sandeep, is that something you're seeing being developed, or you think that's going to be required in the future?
Yes, Scott, that's right. We would likely to have ethical committees kind of overseeing those kind of approval processes. But I also, in my article, the article I mentioned earlier, talk about governance not just restricted to healthcare services, but also governance within software vendors involving patients, because what we have seen in the past in other instances is where patients who are not involved in the or did not have an input into the development and training of AI models, it has led to biases. And we would like to see diversity and also generalization of those AI models, so that governance is not restricted just to the healthcare services, but also there's an onus on the software vendors. But also, I think the government and health, whether it's at the federal level or it's at the state level, they also need to actively consider how these AI applications get approved, and also in terms of them getting approved, it's not a one-off kind of approval and then you forget about it. There's an ongoing monitoring and evaluation of these applications. As you can imagine, with deep learning and neural networks, over time, because of new data and the optimization process, they may be changing their weights, they may be changing their kind of model, and because of that black box issue, we really don't know how these models function. So I think there is an aspect of this continuous monitoring and evaluation. This wouldn't be really hard in healthcare services because we already have a continuous quality improvement process, or what we call clinical governance. So it will very much be in line with that.
I think that's a good point, that we in all our industries have regulation, which obviously is a necessary evil, and controls that we use for our processes, data management. So I think, the question, do we need specific regulation to address AI? Now, I don't say that I have the answer, but I think a really good starting point is what the government's done with their AI ethics principles. Because if you look at your use of AI and proposals that use AI through that 8-point lens, and you apply those pretty strictly, then the chances are you may make mistakes, but it won't be malicious, or it won't be done in a way which negatively impacts the end consumer of that AI product or service. And I think about the existing regulation or codes of conduct we have. So you've got the Hippocratic Oath in the medical space, which is hugely powerful for doctors. In banking, we have the banking code. We have a lot of legislation and regulation which governs how we interact with our customers. Data privacy concerns, data breach notifications, the concept that you can opt out of marketing. Well, maybe we need an algorithm opt out so that people can say, no, I don't want to be used in AI algorithms. I don't want my data to be used to predict my behavior or to predict what products and services I will want. And that's quite likely to be the case. I mean, often we see people taking the marketing opt-out, even though the message that we send are genuinely meant to be beneficial, but people just don't want to be constantly bombarded. So where do you see that going, Gus, in terms of the commercial arena where competition is pretty fierce and you've got to make a profit? How do you see regulation or legislation impacting or being useful in this space?
It's a very hard question to answer, Scott. Yeah, just like an example you mentioned just now, if somebody opt out, I do not want my data to be used in training your AI. What if there's an AI model that has already been trained with that person's data? Then does it mean you have to retrain it without that person now? So then every single person who opt out, you got to retrain the model, right? So this is a very complex question. Yeah. And also like depending who actually did the regulation can also bias towards the benefit of the organization as well. Even though it's government, I would say, right? So yeah, I don't have an answer for that, Scott, but I think it's very, very important, definitely very important question to be answered and to be discussed among various member of the AI group in any country, really. Yeah.
And Sandeep, your views on whether we need extra legislation or regulation to control the use of AI in the medical field?
Certainly. I've been a vocal proponent of monitoring and evaluation of AI in healthcare because of the specific nature of AI applications compared to other traditional software, where you have a semi-autonomous application or potentially into the future autonomous applications. And we already seen where reliance on technology or reliance on technology rather in healthcare can lead to mishaps. So I think there has to be that regulation aspect. But on the other hand, there is also an element of education that is required for workforce because there's a lot of misconception about what AI can do at this stage. There is one extreme end where it says that AI is going to replace doctors, which we know as technologists, that's not true. But on the other hand, you got people who think, AI is just another hype. It's just another fad. It doesn't have any basis. It's all hype without substance. So I think there is an element of educating clinicians. Already there's been trends and initiatives in the United States and the UK to do that. I think Australia is lagging behind. But having said that, I think working in the medical school, I know that we are very keen for our trainee doctors and medical students to be abreast of latest technology, including AI. So that's one aspect. But then when you look at the patient's aspect, unlike what we probably perceive, a lot of patients are actually demanding and asking for this kind of AI. There have been many, many surveys in both in developed countries and developing countries where they found that patients, surprisingly, are actually seeking that AI be included in part of their consultation. It's not necessarily a widespread view, but in many countries that is increasingly becoming prominent. In fact, 2 days ago, I posted something on LinkedIn where they're using Boston Dynamic robots to triage patients. When we go to present to an emergency department, we obviously have the triaging process where we have a nurse or a clinician asking specific questions and prioritizing us according to the severity of the condition. All this was done through a robot, and they found that satisfaction rate quite very, very high. So you're starting to see the trend of patients actually pushing for AI. So there may be a point where patients try to select doctors who actually use AI as opposed to AI. So there's a lot of nitty-gritty and granularity within delivery of healthcare. But I agree with you. I would definitely be looking or supporting continuous monitoring and evaluation and regulation of AI in healthcare.
Okay, guys, I think we've run over time. So one final question. How positive do you think or do you feel about AI and the benefits it's going to bring to your particular industry? Gus?
10 out of 10 for me.
Okay.
Definitely it's going to be even better, than what currently we already have now. Yeah.
Sandy, yourself?
On current technology, from a scale of 1 to 10, I would say 8.
Okay, and in my view is it's probably a 10. I can see just so much potential, but there are there's going to be hiccups along the way and roadblocks and things that we need to solve, but the potential is there. Right, I think we've run over, so I'm going to hand back to Debs. Debs, over to you.
No worries. Thanks so much, Scott. Honestly, I did notice the timer going into overtime, but I was genuinely quite enthralled by everything you guys had to say. I've never been, I suppose, so equally interested yet so equally out of my depth when it came to all things AI. So I really appreciate your time, Scott, Sandeep, and of course Gus as well, Very much appreciated. So that's our last panel for the day, ladies and gents. Thank you once again for attending the Digital Disruption event here over the last 48 hours. It's been absolutely fantastic in terms of all the discussions in the forums and, of course, the questions. I'd like to thank all of our event speakers for their time and effort into delivering such excellent presentations and also such amazing thought leadership as well. A quick summation of the last 2 or so days with a selection of, I suppose, themes or be it pull quotes as well was automate where we think we can differentiate. Look at driving automation from process to improvement. Tech can be both strategic and integral businesses. Finding value and proving value in everything that we do. You can't have automation without innovation. That rings very, very true. Focus on the outcome and not just a feature list or targeting one single business problem when it comes to digital transformation or any transformation, come to think of it. Start small and iterate as fast as you can. Context is, of course, will always be key when interfacing with AI. Ongoing monitoring and evaluation of AI in our communities and industry, whether it be legislative or otherwise. Context matters when it can be exploited when it comes to AI. And would you finally climb Mount Everest in a t-shirt? Be careful with AI as well. So on that note, I would just like to finally thank our event partners, Click. As mentioned before, without these guys, we wouldn't be able to host such an awesome event like this, especially virtually. So thank you very much to Click for all the support and sponsorship over the last 2 days. So ladies and gents, don't forget, a lot of these sessions will be recorded and some great content is also inside your goodie bag. Have a great weekend and thank you again for being with us over the last 2 days.